In 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio gambled millions on a machine that could have changed American rail travel, a 154-foot coal-fired turbine engineered to pull the most luxury streamliner ever imagined at 100 miles per hour. Promises of daylight glamour filled the glossy brochures, but none of these trains ever carried a single paying passenger. Instead, the steam turbine monster met its end in a haze of coal dust, fouled motors, and aborted dreams. How did one railroad's quest to defy dieselization and its own dazzling marketing lead to the most spectacular passenger train that never ran? Glossy brochures promised a new era of American rail travel. The Chessie, as imagined by the Chesapeake and Ohio, was more than a train. It was a moving showcase of post-war optimism. Artists painted scenes of sunlight pouring through panoramic dome cars, passengers lounging in deep seats with cocktails in hand, and children pressing their faces to the glass as the countryside blurred by 100 miles per hour. The Bud Company's streamlined silver coaches gleamed in every illustration, their design inspired by ocean liners and the latest in Art Deco style. Timetables printed in bold type boasted a journey from Washington, D.C. to Cincinnati in under 12 hours, with every mile spent in what the ads called velvet silence. The Chesapeake and Ohio's advertising department spared no expense. Magazine spreads and station posters described the Chessie as the most luxurious all-coach train in the world. Each coach offered just 36 seats, far fewer than most trains of the day, giving every traveler space to stretch out. Renderings of twin-unit dining cars showed white tablecloths and uniformed waiters, while a dedicated movie theater promised first-run films on the rails. The dome cars, a first for the region, invited guests to climb above the roofline for a sweeping view of the Blue Ridge and Ohio valleys, all while speeding along at a pace that rivaled the newest airliners. The promise extended beyond comfort. The M1 steam turbine locomotives, featured prominently in every piece of Chessie publicity, were described as the most powerful and advanced ever built. Brochures called them coal-fired marvels, capable of cruising at 100 miles an hour, their futuristic blue and gold livery leading the parade of silver Bud cars. One timetable graphic placed the Chessie's schedule alongside the fastest trains in the country, suggesting a new benchmark in both speed and style. To the public, the Chessie was not just another train. It was a symbol of American progress, a promise that the golden age of rail had not passed. The anticipation was real. Tickets were reserved, travel agents fielded calls, and railroad magazines speculated breathlessly about the coming revolution. For a brief moment, the dream of daylight glamour seemed just over the horizon, waiting for its first whistle to echo through the mountains. Coal was the lifeblood of the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. In the years after World War II, Chesapeake and Ohio's ledgers showed coal freight accounting for more than half of all revenue, with millions of tons hauled from Appalachia to the steel mills and ports of the East. At a time when other railroads eyed diesel locomotives and oil-fired power, Chesapeake and Ohio's leadership saw no reason to abandon the black rock that had built their empire. The company's chief mechanical engineer, George R. Wharton, became the most vocal champion of this stance. In a 1945 internal memo, he wrote that they could not afford to become dependent on oil while they sat atop America's coal basket, and that their advanced turbine would be the premier demonstration of a modern railway's loyalty to its roots. Oil was not just an economic worry, it was a political and technical threat. The post-war years brought new threats. Oil prices were volatile, and diesel technology, though promising, was still unproven on the scale needed for Chesapeake and Ohio's heaviest trains. Coal, by contrast, was abundant, locally sourced, and politically favored in Washington. Company strategists feared that a turn to diesel would weaken their ties to regional coal producers and undermine the economic ecosystem that kept the railroad and its communities alive. Internal correspondence from 1946 and 1947 reveals a clear institutional logic. As long as Chesapeake and Ohio could prove steam was competitive, it could justify investments in coal and resist the pressure to dieselize. The Chessie Streamliner became the perfect stage for this strategy. By designing a new class of locomotive that could burn coal cleanly, deliver 6,000 horsepower, and run at 100 miles per hour, Wharton and his team set out to prove that coal-fired steam could still lead the industry. The M1 project was not just about moving passengers in style, it was about defending the economic foundation of the Chesapeake and Ohio and the coal fields it served. Every decision, from the choice of turbine electric drive to the bold center cab layout, reflected a determination to keep coal at the heart of American railroading. The company's gamble rested on the belief that new technology could overcome the old limitations of steam, and that loyalty to coal would pay off in both prestige and profit. In the boardrooms and engineering offices of the Chesapeake and Ohio, the stakes were clear. The M1 would be a public demonstration of faith in coal's future and a challenge to the diesel tide sweeping through the industry. Wharton's advocacy ensured that the Chessie's promise was more than marketing. It was a declaration that the age of coal was not ready to end. Baldwin Locomotive Works and Westinghouse Electric joined forces to build something the rail world had never seen before. The Chesapeake and Ohio M1 class steam turbine electrics, numbered 500, Ba1, and Fa2, stood as giants even among the biggest locomotives of their day. Each M1 stretched an astonishing 154 feet from nose to tail, making them the longest single-unit locomotives ever to run on American rails. Tipping the scales at nearly 857,000 pounds, they weighed more than 3 fully loaded diesel units coupled together. The M1's architecture was as radical as its size. Up front, a towering coal bunker dominated the nose, holding enough fuel for a high-speed overnight run from Washington to Cincinnati. Just behind that sat the crew cab, perched at the very center of the machine. Engineers and firemen worked surrounded by a labyrinth of gauges, controls, and indicator lights, with clear lines of sight in both directions, a necessity for a locomotive longer than most city blocks. Behind the cab, the heart of the M1's innovation came into view. Steam from a massive fire tube boiler located at the very rear of the locomotive traveled forward through insulated pipes to a Westinghouse-built turbine set. This turbine spun at thousands of revolutions per minute, converting the heat of burning coal into mechanical energy. Instead of turning wheels directly, the turbine powered 4 direct current generators, each producing about 1,300 horsepower. Electricity from these generators fed 8 traction motors, which drove the locomotive's 5 articulated trucks. Builder diagrams describe the wheel arrangement as 2C1 plus 2C1B with a total of 12 powered axles. The M1 was designed to deliver 6,000 horsepower at the turbine, more than any steam locomotive in Chesapeake and Ohio's fleet, and rivaling the biggest diesels of the era. The wheelbase alone spanned nearly 120 feet, with the rest of the length taken up by overhanging hoods and the massive rear boiler section. Water tanks were tucked low inside the frame, balanced against the weight of the coal bunker and turbine machinery. Forced draft fans drew air from intakes near the nose, channeling it through the coal bunker and firebox before venting hot gases forward, a reversal of the usual steam locomotive layout. Every feature of the M1 reflected a single-minded pursuit of power, speed, and range. The 11-notch throttle allowed fine control, with setting 7 enough to cruise at 70 miles per hour. On paper, the M1s could haul the chassis' gleaming Bud cars at a steady 100 miles per hour, making the run from Washington to Cincinnati in under 12 hours. Factory blueprints and cutaway schematics from Baldwin and Westinghouse highlighted the complexity of the internal flows: coal moving rearward, steam traveling forward, and electricity coursing through thick cables to the wheels. Even the paint scheme, deep blue with gold striping, was chosen to match the chassis' promise of luxury and modernity. Baldwin's assembly records and builder plates testify to the ambition behind these machines. Each M1 was not just a locomotive, but a rolling experiment in the future of coal-fired railroading. The dimensions alone made them a spectacle at every stop, but it was the intricate dance of fuel, steam, and electricity inside that set them apart from anything else on the rails. Inside the M1, every inch of space was shaped by the drive for power and speed. At the very front, a massive coal bunker dominated the nose, feeding black fuel onto a mechanical stoker that snaked rearward through the body. Just behind the cab, forced draft fans pulled in fresh air from side intakes, channeling it directly through the coal bunker. This air picked up fine coal dust before plunging into the firebox at the rear, where combustion turned water in the fire tube boiler into high-pressure steam. Steam, traveling forward in thick, insulated pipes, reached the heart of the machine, a Westinghouse turbine spinning at thousands of revolutions per minute. Instead of driving wheels directly, the turbine powered 4 DC generators, each producing about 1,300 horsepower. Thick cables carried this electricity to 8 traction motors mounted along the 5 articulated trucks. The motors, tucked low between the wheels, translated electrical power into motion, pushing the locomotive, which weighed 857,000 pounds, across the rails. But the same airflow that fed the fire also set up a hidden vulnerability. As air moved from the coal bunker through the furnace, it swept up dust and ash, carrying them forward along the machinery spaces. Builder schematics show that these forced draft channels ran perilously close to the generator room and the traction motors. Without modern filtration or tight compartment seals, coal dust and moisture-laden air slipped past basic baffles, settling deep inside the electrical housings. The rear-mounted boiler, unusual for a steam locomotive, created its own challenges. Steam lines running forward from the back of the locomotive often leaked condensation into the machinery spaces. During heavy throttle operation, steam quality dropped, and moisture and dissolved solids carried over into the turbine. This wet steam, combined with the dust-laden airflow, created a perfect storm inside the generator and motor compartments. Maintenance logs later described finding coal residue caked on windings and water pooling in the bottom of motor housings. Every technical drawing from Baldwin and Westinghouse emphasized the complexity of these internal flows. Air, dust, water, and electricity all intersected in the narrow corridors beneath the cab and around the turbine. The very design that promised efficiency and power left the M1 exposed to relentless contamination. Coal dust, conductive when damp, worked its way into the insulation of the traction motors. Moisture accelerated corrosion and electrical shorts. Even daily cleaning with compressed air and jury-rigged shrouds could not keep up. At the core of the M1's ambition was a simple idea: move air, steam, and power as efficiently as possible from one end to the other. But the forced draft system and the direct route from coal bunker to turbine meant that every run risked carrying the byproducts of combustion straight into the heart of the electrical drive. The M1's cross-section, on paper a marvel of modern engineering, became in practice a blueprint for vulnerability, a design that would soon reveal its fatal flaws when tested on the rails. June 17, 1947, brought the first real test for M1, number 500. The plan was simple: run from Clifton Forge to Charlottesville at speed to simulate the chassis' promised schedule. Dispatch logs from that day list 2 unscheduled stops. Just past Ty River, the turbine lost power. Inside the cab, engineer Tom Morgan's diary described the scene: traction motors arcing, indicator lights flickering, and a sharp chemical smell as coal dust met hot windings. Shopmen scrambled to clear the fault, using air hoses and rags to wipe out the black residue caked inside the motor housings. The train sat silent on the main line for nearly an hour before limping to the next siding. Maintenance logs from Clifton Forge told the rest of the story. Every inspection found new layers of coal dust coating the electrical gear. Water condensed from the steam lines pooled in the bottom of the motor compartments. Shop crews tried everything, including mesh filters, makeshift rubber gaskets, and extra drainage piping. Nothing slowed the buildup. Motors were blown out with compressed air at the end of every run, but by the next morning, the residue was back. One mechanic wrote in the January 1949 shop log, "Motors inspected, found half covered in coal residue. 2-hour delay to clear and dry. Recommend daily cleaning schedule, but repairs cannot keep pace with new fouling." The forced draft fans that fed the firebox also pulled fine coal dust and ash through every gap in the machinery. The baffles, meant to shield the traction motors, could not stop the smallest particles. When the weather turned damp, moisture mixed with the dust, making it conductive, perfect for shorting out the motor windings. Electrical failures became routine. Clifton Forge maintenance records tracked an average of 2.6 traction motor breakdowns for every 10,000 miles, nearly 10 times the rate of the C&O diesel electrics. Each breakdown meant hours lost, schedules missed, and mounting frustration among the shopmen tasked with keeping the giant machines moving. By late 1947, the shop crews had run out of easy fixes. The logs filled with notes about jury-rigged repairs and parts cannibalized from one M1 to keep another running. Every test run risked another stall, another round of frantic cleaning and rewiring. The promise of effortless high-speed service had given way to a daily battle against coal dust, water, and the limits of design. In the boardroom, these failures were impossible to ignore. In December 1947, the Chesapeake and Ohio's Finance Committee gathered to make a decision that had been looming for months. The numbers on the table told a story of mounting losses, Passenger projections had collapsed, and the shop logs for the M1s showed breakdowns outpacing repairs. Board minutes from that month cited technical setbacks and unsustainable projected losses, with directors weighing the cost of more delays against the reality of empty seats and a shrinking market. The formal vote ended the chassis before it ever carried a single paying traveler. The new Bud cars, once destined for daylight luxury, were quietly reassigned to other routes. The M1s, stripped of their flagship role, were sent to regular service between Clifton Forge and Charlottesville, a far cry from the glamour promised in the brochures. On these ordinary runs, the M1s could not escape their reputation. Maintenance logs from 1948 and 1949 tracked a steady drumbeat of failures, coal dust and water, still fouling the traction motors, shop crews improvising with filters and drainage that never quite worked. Each locomotive demanded more attention than a fleet of diesel electrics, and the cost per mile soared. By comparison, the new EMD diesel electrics offered 2,000 horsepower per unit, could be coupled in pairs or trios, swapped out in minutes, and serviced with off-the-shelf parts. Chesapeake and Ohio's own records showed diesel units running 10 times the distance between major overhauls, with maintenance costs dropping sharply as more diesels entered the roster. By 1949, the M1s were spending more time in the shop than on the rails. The decision came quietly. Withdraw the three turbine giants, sell them for scrap, and move on. In 1950, all three were cut up, their builders' plates scattered to collectors, and their hulking frames melted down. No ceremony, no fanfare, just a final entry in the company's asset ledger. The gamble on coal-fired innovation had ended, overtaken by the relentless advance of diesel power. The board's vote closed the book on one of American railroading's boldest and briefest experiments. Today, the gamble to outpace change with sheer scale echoes in every industry facing disruption. As railroads embrace new technologies, the M1's fate reminds us: innovation without adaptability leads to obsolescence, not progress. Ambition alone won't keep dreams on track. The world moves forward, with or without our grandest machines. What do you think? Was it vision or hubris? Share your thoughts below.